This is Gaming Gaiden, the podcast that uncovers the side stories of the gaming world as well as the world of Japanese to English localization. I am Mike, and with me as always is my partner.
It's Andrew, everybody. How's it going?
All right. And tonight we'll be interviewing Jenn O'Donnell. She is a localization director in Osaka. And she is the host of her own podcast called Translation Chat, in which she interviews translators about their most beloved translations from other artists. She also has another one called Otafu Susume. And she has an excellent resource for anyone who's an aspiring translator. Her own website, Jenn Translations. Is that how I should say it? Or is it?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's kind of a pun. Jenn
I figured it was the name.
Jen.
That's jenntranslations.com. There's a lot of
Amazing.
great resources there for anyone interested in reading from other translators and also learning about the field and how to go about pursuing a career in it. So thank you so much for coming on tonight, Jenn.
No, thank you so much for inviting me.
Thank you. Yeah, and this is really uncanny, but you had a 10-episode season of a podcast where you're interviewing translators. I had this exact same idea. I swear I did not know this till I looked you up for this show. It's uncanny. It's absolutely uncanny.
And the funny thing is, I said, I knew you had the podcast, but I also knew it was a bit of a different animal. It was interviewing translators about their most favorite translations and stuff. So I was like, it's a bit of a different angle.
I've listened to so many podcasts about like translators' careers and how they became translators, but I wanted to talk about translation and what makes good translation and yeah, really hearing experts' opinions. I have a lot of really interesting insights from a wide variety of people, and I'm working on season 2 right now, so that should be out pretty soon.
That's awesome. It might be out before this first season drops.
Possibly.
That's cool. Yeah, it's great to record 10 or 5 to 10 in advance.
Yeah,
I think for sure.
For sure.
So we're gonna start from the beginning. What got you into Japan in the first place?
In the first place, so when I grew up in England. I don't know if you can tell from my accent. Sometimes I talk to people and they're like, "Are you Australian?" They're like, no.
Yeah.
And when I was in college, which is like high school age, 16 to 18, a friend of mine was studying Japanese. And I thought, oh, that looks really cool. Can I, who's your teacher? And she introduced me to her private teacher and I started lessons. And about the same time, I started my very first job as a waitress, so I could pay for my own lessons. And it was the one hobby that I didn't give up after 3 months. So I just kept going. And then my friend was like, hey, I'm going to go to Japan for a couple of months. Do you want to come with? I was like, yeah, why not? I mean, I've been learning it. Why not? And then went to Japan, studied at a language school in Fukuoka, and we volunteered on farms. And then I pretty much just fell in love with the language and the people and the culture. And it all went downhill from there.
Wait a second. Did you just say you volunteered on farms?
Yes.
Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, that's
This is interesting. That's a very different angle. I'm curious.
Yeah, there's this program called WOOF, Worldwide Organization for Organic Farms, where you can pretty much sign up to any country and say, I want to volunteer on farms, and you look at a collection of farms, and they're all organic, and they have to be approved by the organization. And you go and you volunteer and you live with the family and you work on their farm pretty much in exchange for food and lodging. So it was a really cheap way to travel around Japan while also being forced to use the language because they're all farmers. They don't speak English.
True.
What were they growing? What were you? Yeah. What were the
I went on
what kind of
2 farms. The first one was a strawberry farm, which is fun because they were
nice.
like, oh yeah, feel free to eat strawberries as many as you want. So I was like, well, because on strawberries you have to handpick the runners that go off the strawberries to stop them from planting themselves and wasting energy on unnecessary plants. We want them to put energy into strawberries. So my job was picking off the runners and eating strawberries. And and the second farm was a duck farm. So getting up early in the morning, picking up all the eggs, getting in
Wow.
fights with geese,
organic
planting
ducks.
rice. Yeah.
And geese. I've got geese in my neighborhood, and I tell you, you try to take a walk, and it's like, I don't know why we call it a flock. They're definitely a gang. They hiss,
Yeah, they're vicious.
they will hiss at you, and they've got like teeth. I don't know what's going on. Now I see all the time in popular media. There's a white goose that's depicted, but I've only ever seen Canadian geese, the brown ones.
Yeah.
So, I don't know
Yeah.
if the white geese are any different from the Canadian geese, but
No,
as far
they're
as I
still
know,
vicious little buggers.
They're all insanely aggressive. Got to protect the ducks from them.
Are you from London or more on the countryside or where?
In the
England?
countryside, I grew up in Kent and then moved to
Kent.
the Cotswolds, which, if you've seen Hot Fuzz, that's the Cotswolds.
Okay.
Oh.
It's
Everyone
been
in
years
their
since
mums
I've
is
seen
packing
it.
around deer, like farmer, strong farmer accent.
I loved that movie.
It's so good.
Yeah, it's awesome.
All right.
Did you know that you were good at it pretty early on? Like, were you're pretty good at picking up language?
Oh God, no, I'm terrible at languages.
Really? Okay.
Welcome
Yeah, at secondary school, I studied French and Spanish, and my Spanish teacher told me I would fail. So I got the BBC Teach Yourself Spanish CDs, and I managed to get a C at least. So I got a C in French and Spanish. And so, no, I was terrible at languages. But for some reason, Japanese just clicked. And I found out many years later that, actually 10 years later, that I'm dyslexic. And Japanese is actually really good for dyslexic because it's such a logical language and you can piece it together almost like maths.
That's interesting.
But it took me so long to pick up Japanese. Like, you meet people who pick it up in like 3 years, and I'm like, what the heck? It took me 10 years to get to the same level that it took them 3 years. But I've learned that it's not a competition. Like, you just take it at your own
Right.
pace.
Says to anybody listening, I'd let you know I started in 2001, and it's 2022, and I'm pretty solidly on that intermediate plateau. So yeah,
I've been doing the thing where you listen to it all the time at work, just try even if I don't get some of it. So that actually has helped. Mike, you should probably do more of that. Like, even if you don't get it, doesn't matter. Just
I would
let
love
it seep in.
but I can't right now.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I'm
time and energy have such a big impact on whether you can do that. Yeah.
I've seen a lot of that. I'm sure you've seen some of this like Japanese language learning community stuff going around, the immersion methods and all that. And it's like, if I were in high school, I would give it a shot. I can't right now. I'm over 40 and I got some stuff to do. So
I was okay at spelling, so I found learning kanji not too hard. Not compared to a lot of people complain about kanji the most, but for me it was generally listening. That was the part that was hard, especially when the sentence structure, the grammar is completely reversed. I think, the point comes in, the point of the sentence coming in different times and things like that. I really tripped up on that a lot when I was especially first learning.
Especially when they're like da 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 da, and then throw in a negative or a double negative at the end. You're like, wait, so is that a positive or a negative?
Yes.
I do get lost with the multiple negatives, absolutely, especially since it's not intuitive for English. You get the one negative and that's about it generally. So I'm curious about something though. You said it wasn't until about 10 years later, after having started studying, you said that you found you had dyslexia?
Yeah, I was actually doing my master's degree in translation, and my lecturer called me in and was like, so you've misspelt this word, and I don't know why, but you've misspelt it consistently throughout the whole essay. And it was like a key piece of theory, and it was called scopus. But the teacher who was teaching it to us was Japanese, and so she was pronouncing it scorbus. And so in my mind, it had an R in, but it doesn't. So he was like, you've spelt this wrong. I think you might be dyslexic. And through the university, they got me tested. And then it turned out that, yeah, I am dyslexic, but I found ways throughout the years to kind of try and compensate for it. But stuff still slips through.
Yeah.
So I was like, oh, okay, that explains a lot about struggles at school and stuff like that.
Yeah. Well, I'm curious how it affects other languages, as a language learner in French and Spanish and Japanese, or how it might manifest in Japanese.
In Japanese, I actually wrote an article for the Japan Times about how dyslexia appears in Japanese, and there's not really much studies on it in terms for adults. And people say that dyslexia doesn't exist in Japanese, but it definitely does. Like, I've talked to many Japanese people, and they struggle with similar issues where, like, you mix sounds around, or you read kanji and your brain swaps the kanji around. And so for years, like, instead of keiken, I would read it as kenkei. And it's a matter of focusing on the things you're making mistakes in over and over again, and being like, okay, no, I keep getting this wrong for this reason. It's actually this. And so I found my own techniques to kind of try and tackle the dyslexia so I can learn the language correctly.
Right. Yeah. No, we all try to compensate, in our own ways. I'm a teacher of English as a second language, so I'm always interested in how someone's learning or how things are affecting their learning,
Mike actually wanted to be a teacher. I was just there to hang out when I was an English teacher in Japan.
Yeah, so I mean, it's one of the common ways for people to come around. That's why I was so interested to hear about the farming angle.
Yeah, right. That is cool. That is pretty cool. You don't get paid really anything, right? They just give you a place to stay and something to eat.
Yep, just place to stay. Yeah, basically. It's great for students who can't really afford to stay in language school for several months.
Oh,
Did they give you more than strawberries to eat, though?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, I just want to make sure. A little further nutrition.
Fukuoka is known for really good food, too, right? Like,
yeah.
Even amongst Japan, even out of Japan. That high bar.
Yeah, before living in Osaka, I lived in Fukuoka for a while. And when I came to Osaka, I was like, oh, no, wait. Yeah, the food really is way better in Fukuoka.
Oh, really? Yeah, right?
Yeah, after coming back to America, I miss Japanese food in general, so I can't imagine how much better it is in an area where Japanese people would be like, oh yeah, that's good stuff.
I was coming in from, the first time I went, I was in college, and I was living in Savannah, Georgia for college, and I had never really quite had food at that quality before that time, and I had never had curry before Japan, and a few other things that aren't Japanese, but were like, they were my first experience in Japan. Just any kind of food, even like Spanish food. People in the South don't talk about paella, but the Japanese people do. So I had my first paella in Japan. Just lots of things like that,
Yeah.
Wow, that must have been such an amazing experience. Like,
oh, I've told this story on other podcast I do a long time ago, but I had never been on a train before. I was in the middle of Tokyo. My friend's leading us around. That's how I was able to get around. This is my first time in 2004. I was 20. And he was like, we're going to switch this line to that line and then go to this line to get to our hostel. And I'm like, that's cool. What's a line? I did not know what a train line was. I didn't know what transferring was. So I had all kinds of issues at first. Mike's from New York, so you were fine.
Yeah, I had some experience with trains in the whole New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania tri-state area. So it was no big deal.
You're from Pennsylvania too?
I went to high school in Pennsylvania. So look at this. We're learning as much
Wait,
about
how long
each
have
other
you known
as
each
we
other
for?
Since 2006.
Yeah. You know how it is when you only really interact in certain ways. It limits the scope of your conversations, and then you find out little things in other conversations.
But going back, you got into Japanese stuff via actual culture. I mean, not that anime and manga is not actual culture, but you know what I mean. Food, language, dance, maybe even bon odori. I don't know, like cultural items, not manga and anime and video games.
Not quite, because that friend that was studying Japanese, so I was like, oh my god, that's so cool. She got me into anime and manga as well. So.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
You know, those years when before Crunchyroll and you were sharing CDs with friends.
Yeah.
Okay.
So when you started that, did you have a goal in mind beyond just like, I want to enjoy and explore this language?
No, I didn't even expect to keep it up for that long. Like I said, I normally dropped hobbies after a couple of months, but I think having somebody there to kind of keep you not accountable, but I know having somebody else to learn it with helped motivate me to keep it going. And I didn't really have a goal until I went to Japan. And I remember hiking. Went on a hike with one of the families, and I remember thinking, I love this so much. I love being able to speak it. I really want to be an interpreter. And so I think that was the first time that I was like, oh, I want to use this for something.
All right. So when you say you wanted to be an interpreter, are you saying that specifically you wanted to do spoken work?
Yes, because even at that time, before I had any, like, how old was I? I would have been 19. Before I had any idea that I was dyslexic, I was like, well, my speaking and my listening is so much stronger than my reading. So I want to be an interpreter.
Oh, wow.
Okay. But have you done a lot of interpretation work, or it's
Some.
been mostly translation?
Mostly translation.
Okay.
Yeah, I've had the honor of interpreting for some big names at conventions, and I've been able to use some of my interpreting at work. But yeah, definitely translation has definitely been more prevalent.
Okay.
Yeah, I would think that makes sense. So I think that leads pretty naturally into one of these questions we like to discuss regularly or have you address, which would be the difference between localization and translation and how you perceive that to be.
Here we go.
That is... So I mentioned that I did an MA in translation, which was mostly theory. And academics have been arguing about the definition of translation since the 50s. And no one can decide on a clear definition. And even localization originated from the practice of changing a software language to a different language. And then it was quickly applied to human languages. So so that's like, that's just what I want to say off the bat, is that there really isn't a finite definition. And I see localization used in two different ways now. The first one is how I understand it as a localization director working in games, is sort of localization describes the overall process of taking a product from one country or one culture and then making it marketable into another culture. So it's translation and editing, but it's also programming, asset creation, dubbing, and sort of the overall process, and not just into one language, but also multiple languages.
Right. Yeah, so I always find that interesting to see you coming from the UK, that if something is going to be released there, it's got to have, 5-6 languages in the mix for a European release.
Yeah, I mean, the things I work on tend to have 7 to 9 languages, maybe even. So it's not just English I have to think about. It's a whole wide variety of cultures from around the world. And but a lot of people think of localization as sort of a type of translation. People see it as, I guess the term is really making a piece of text read naturally to a target audience. But really you can't have translation without localization, because you want the translation to read naturally to the target audience.
Right, yeah. It's a Venn diagram.
Every language and every culture is different. And sort of taking... It doesn't necessarily mean, erasing the original culture, but at least making it so it's understandable. But people often misinterpret it, and I often see people say, "Don't localize, just translate," and it's like that's not that simple.
Right.
They're impossible to separate.
Yeah, absolutely. It's That's been my experience even at the intermediate level. It's interesting to think about how many things I learned. Like Andrew was saying, he first learned about trains and the train line in Japan. Like the other day I was looking at, I've been studying kanji, and I got the kanji for juku, and I went to go do the flashcard for it, and the flashcard, I typed in the word juku. I typed in Romaji, Juku, and they were like, "Oh, it's cram school," and I was like, "That's not a thing. We don't have that. That's not a thing. It's called a juku." you know? So like to try and think of like, well, how am I gonna communicate the concept of juku even to myself to get it right on this flashcard? And I just said, forget it, override. Juku is correct.
Yeah. Some just don't have a great translation. Do you wish that people that take in this kind of media that you translate, you wish they knew more? I guess it's tough to say, but do you wish they knew more about how hard this can be at times?
Let's leave that more open-ended to you, actually. I don't want to trap you with anything there. What are some things you might like for people to know and understand about the work that you do that they may not know?
So much more complicated than people think.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's very easy to blame the translator.
Mm-hmm.
But, a project can vary so drastically depending on the company who's working on it, the company who's licensing it, the agency in charge of the translation, the people in charge of the project, the translators and the editors working on it. Like everybody brings something different, and therefore it's different every single time. Mm-hmm. And which is why you get such a wide range of styles of localization, like localized games throughout the industry. Because you might get some things that are handled in-house and they have a very strict style, and they have sort of like Square Enix, who tend to I think they just have a really strong style of localization from the days when Richard Mark Honeywood founded the localization department there, compared to maybe something released by Bandai, who tend to license everything out to agencies. And so I think it's not as simple as it's just the translator making all the decisions a lot of the time.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
it's a wide variety of people.
You mentioned in-house versus farming out. Can you talk a little bit about some of the differences in these different modes of translation and localization, and what you feel works best?
Yeah, so I used to be a freelancer, and so I get to have the experience of working on both sides of the wall, so to speak. Like as a freelancer, people are contract workers. They're just hired for that project, and obviously, like I said, it varies from company to company, but from my experience, contractors are not really told much. They're given the text and they're like, okay, go translate this.
Okay.
But they're not really
given from the media.
Separated from the media, separated from... It's very rare that a company will provide context, which is something that I've been trying to push to change in the industry, especially through the International Game Developers Association. So freelancers aren't really given much context, they're not really given much information, and there's often this feeling that you can't ask questions. Like, you don't want to, be a troublemaker for the agency you're working for, so people will just translate and hand it back, and then you might never hear from it again. You might never hear from an editor. Like, they'll take it, and then an editor will change things, and then it'll go on to somebody else. And so it's kind of more of a, I guess, like assembly line rather than collaborative project. But like I said, I mean, every company is different, and you do have some great localization companies who turn it into a collaboration between the team, where the translator and editor are working together to really polish the translation, and they know that they can ask the company questions through the agency. And there's like, honestly, the more communication you have, the better product you're going to get.
That makes sense.
And when you're working in-house, you of course have direct access to the people who know the information, so it's a lot easier to ask questions. Like, as a localization director, it's my job often to field those questions from internal and external translators, or contact the developers and being like, okay, so is this what you meant by this? Or, hey, is this plural or singular? Is this character male or female?
Yeah.
Sort of what's the background information here that really influences the translation?
That's,
Do you have?
Yeah, that sounds nice. Get that nuance.
Yeah.
You have a lot of interaction ever with, for example, the game screenwriter, the original person that wrote the dialogue?
Yeah. Normally people. It's never, again, even on the Japanese side, it's never one person. It's a team effort, and fielding questions from translators often involves talking to those writers and being like, what did you mean by this, and things like that.
Now, are they fielding them in 9 different languages? You said you were doing some localization projects where you're working
No,
on...
I only know Japanese and English, so luckily everybody communicates in English.
Okay, that's cool.
Have you had to oversee any projects with languages that you were not a native of?
Yes.
Beyond Japanese, of course.
Yes. And I mean, even when working with English translators, there's a point where you have to trust that the translator's doing a good job.
Yeah.
And you have to
Right.
trust that, I mean, that's why we have localization quality assurance, LQA, to make sure that everything's okay. So there are, again, like I said, multiple people looking at it and seeing everything in context and making sure everything's consistent and accurate to the situation. And like I said, even if it's a language I don't understand, I have to trust that the team are doing their jobs.
Well, what if
Right.
the, let's say Spanish is another language, right? You said you studied it, but you probably
Yeah.
couldn't do translation.
forgot
work
everything.
for it, right? So if the person on that team is translating, doing localization into Spanish, and they have questions, is there a separate director of localization for Spanish, or is there one localization director for everyone in, say, an in-house structure?
Normally
I'm not sure
there's
how that works.
one director for all languages. So the localization director's job is to manage the whole localization of every language for all the different regions.
So
And
if you trust the Spanish speaker to translate, but the Spanish translator doesn't trust their own interpretation of something, and they want to get some clarification, how do they go about it?
just message me and say, hey, I'm not too sure about this. I think that's the thing, is people are often, especially freelancers, because you don't have that, you don't know if it's okay to ask questions. And
Okay.
from my perspective, if you're not asking questions, then something is wrong. Like, you should be curious, and you should be, like, nobody's perfect, everybody's human. There are often things that I'm not too sure about, and I will ask other people because I want to learn. Like, I'd rather, feel a little awkward now by asking a question than horribly embarrass myself later on by getting something horribly, maybe making a terrible mistake.
Right. But does
Is there any kind of... Go ahead, Mike.
I'm sorry, I was going to say, what does this mean, though, that, say, like, if the localization director is an English and Japanese speaker, but the Spanish translator doesn't speak English, would they contact you in Japanese? Is that... I'm not sure,
probably.
like, how the de facto works here.
Like I said, it varies from project to project. Sometimes the source language is Japanese, sometimes the source language is English for all languages. So at least working in-house, everybody can speak Japanese and English. So we communicate in both Japanese and English.
Oh, so everybody uses those two. So the people doing those other languages are trilingual at a minimum.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, wow.
And some people even know more than, like, some people are polyglots, and I am infinitely jealous.
Yeah. See them on YouTube.
Well, yeah.
What's the difference between localization director and coordinator, and then localizer? What's the differences?
It depends from company to company.
Okay.
Right. So these are not codified across.
Yeah, they really do vary drastically. Sort of a director would probably be more of a overarching manager for everybody. A coordinator could be just for the other languages, like we say FIGs, French, Italian, German, Spanish, but also you have multiple other languages, like Asian languages. And so a coordinator could be somebody who works specifically with those teams and fielding questions from them. Honestly, it depends on the size of the project as well. So if you have a game that has like 1.5 million Moji characters in Japanese, which is then translated into 700,000 English words, sort of having multiple managers in charge of the teams to help field multiple questions or bugs from LQA. A coordinator would probably be in charge of those other languages. And localizer is normally the term for a translator or an editor.
Okay, yeah, I've just seen these positions listed on company websites before. I didn't quite know what it all meant.
Like I said, it can still vary between companies, and it's kind of annoying because you're like, okay, but I had this title in this company, it doesn't quite translate, no pun intended, to another one.
Okay. The localization director could possibly not even be localizing that much because it's a lot of managerial stuff, probably.
Yeah. It's I guess it's basically a fancy word for a project manager.
Project manager.
I'm not sure if I'm picking up a little lament in your voice there with that.
Yeah. I really like translating. But I also really like managing. And so I'm torn between two things. Yeah. Obviously you do translate, but it's often internal communications.
Right. So if you were, free from whatever the requirements are and you were given the chance to localize any game of your choosing from the past, something you're familiar with that you enjoy, that you would like to revisit and work on yourself, what would that be?
Oh, that's such a difficult question.
It is a difficult question, but at the same time, I feel like it should be something that comes to mind easily. Like, I do have a passion for this one particular game or whatever it may be.
Oh, I mean, I love the Final Fantasies, but I don't know if I'd want. But I really like how they were already translated, so I wouldn't want to say, "Oh, I wish I could do it," because I don't think I could do a better job than what was already done.
Yeah, sometimes I forget that we eventually got them. I think we got them all eventually.
I think so, yeah.
With the DS and everything.
Yeah.
I keep forgetting, things went a little weird for a while there.
Yeah, they were skipping it because they didn't think that Westerners would like RPGs. I mean, even the UK never got a single one until Final Fantasy VII, I think.
Yeah.
America got a couple. Right? Not that many, though.
That was a different time.
This is a different time, yeah. Yeah, I think Final Fantasy VII was the first one in all of Europe. And then they skipped 2 or 3 of them before 7. All the numbers got mixed up, but yeah, that history is interesting. Yeah, they just, I don't know, maybe their test marketing at the time showed that Western gamers just didn't want to play those kind of games, but look at us now. There's hardly any the difference between gaming tastes. Maybe it was never that big in the first place, but it does seem like whatever gap that was there is always getting smaller, and you see a lot of, from what I can tell anyway, a lot of Japanese gamers as well playing Fortnite, playing Call of Duty, playing whatever you would call a Western game as well. So, it's, to me, somebody that's been playing games my whole life, it's interesting to see these developments. Yeah. And to see better translation all the time, because in the 90s there was some good ones, but there was some even better ones, I would say, just because of how bad they were.
Again, I think the early ones were definitely, you're sent in Excel with all the Japanese in, and then to have to just guess the context.
Yeah.
And so I think that resulted in a lot of very interesting localizations in the... I want to say... My brain wants to say 90s, but I guess it was the 2000s, more realistically.
Yeah.
It's possible. The gaming industry was just different in the 90s, too. I mean, the legendary stories I've heard are... A lot of times they wouldn't have enough money for an actual translator, so they would get the Japanese person in the office that knew English the best to translate the game. So that's why you get, especially with my beloved Neo Geo SNK, Victory, victory with an L right in the game when you win the match. Just really a lot of glaring stuff like that. But now it's great. Now, we love it. I'd love to look back on those times. At least I do.
Yeah, it's funny to think about how much the quality has improved over the years, because like I think about it when I see some games now, every so often something doesn't seem right to me, just feels unnatural in some way, and it just really stands out to me now, whereas years ago I wouldn't have thought twice about it, being like sometimes they're good, sometimes they're not, whatever. But now
what are you gonna
it's
do?
Like, whoa, what happened here?
Yeah, that's true. I noticed that a lot with the latest Dragon Quest games. I couldn't believe how good the translation was.
That's Schluck who handled that. They are like people fan about like voice actors and stuff, and I'm like, oh my god, this localization company is so cool.
Oh, it was really good. It kind of felt like, is this... And I hadn't played Dragon Quest in a long time. I didn't grow up playing a whole bunch of RPGs, but when I played that, I felt, is this kind of how it was always supposed to be? This is how the English translation should have been. Actually, I don't want to be too negative about people before that, but it just seems like there's definitely been a little bit of there's some progression in translation over the years. I guess I can say that.
Actually, by sheer serendipity, Schluck, who handles the Dragon Quest localizations now, they started working on Dragon Quest with Dragon Quest 8 because they were working with Mark Honeywood, and he kind of with them developed this style. And Richard is amazing because he knows programming as well, and he combined his programming knowledge with language so that you could have like a group of monsters appears, or 3 like hand witches appear, and sort of where the grammar changes depending on what you're going up against. And he used that as well for other languages, so that you could use, so in French and Spanish, the masculine and feminine or the plural will change depending on the enemies or sort of the speaker character, if the character is male or female. So he developed this sort of programming linguistic integration, and he worked with Schluck to create these very natural like localizations with accents and with fun
That's great.
translations. And then Schluck went off, and now they do their own thing, and they still use the systems that Richard created in their localizations. And it's just it just makes me happy to see, because Richard also did work with the International Game Developers Association to kind of create the best practices of localization, and that's kind of been a standard in the industry for a long time as well.
Wow.
Yeah. No, like I said, I'm
cool.
fan about
No, that's cool.
localizers.
So you have a master's in translation, right?
Mm-hmm.
What can you talk about any of the things that you do? Somehow what you just said led me to this. It connects, I guess. Yeah. But the, what do you call it? Like modulation and all these kind of like translation theory and stuff. What can you tell us a little bit, anything at all about what's some very common techniques that you do, or that Honeycutt has done, or things like that? What do you employ? What kind of stuff do you employ pretty often?
I don't think you really think about it, but the biggest one is definitely equivalence.
Equivalence,
which is the theory of having something equivalent in another language. another language, which could be on a word level, so like having the equivalent meaning of the word, or a sentence level, the equivalent meaning of the sentence, or just overall tone and sort of this character wants to say this. This is what they want to convey. And so what is the equivalent of that in this language? And I think there's one thing is that Japanese and English have different styles of accents and different styles of sort of different stereotypes when it comes to different characters. And I think that's one thing that Richard Honeywood did a great job with establishing, was how really strong characterization. And you definitely see that in the modern Dragon Quest as well, as like Ni no Kuni and the original Final Fantasy X that he worked on as well. In that you have people with very strong characters come through in their accents. Like not I was watching my spouse play Secret of Mana, and there was one character who was talking like a child, but they were talking in a very unnatural way. Like a child wouldn't speak like that, but it was how they would imagine a child to speak. And it was just very jarring and annoying.
Okay.
But sort of equivalence in character is that they would probably still be understandable, but use childish languages. So it's more like about the word choice and the sort of pacing of a sentence.
Right.
So I guess there's already equivalence at that point. Well, I guess that they're saying the point of equivalence is that they're saying exactly the same thing as the original Japanese or the source language, but they're saying it in a way that fits their character. So they're not using the exact same words, but they're conveying the same meaning while being true to their character. And I think that's really important.
I definitely felt some curiosity about one of the characters in Dragon Quest XI when I was playing. I played it in English, and there was one character who seemed to be affecting sort of a New Jersey accent at times, and it felt like, I'm not sure how this works in that group, but then it made me start to think about the Japanese version. I was like, I wonder if he's got a unique accent in that one from the rest of the crew. And I never did look into it because the American version of Dragon Quest doesn't have Japanese support on it. I don't know if either of you guys ever tried the Japanese version.
No, I haven't. No.
There's a character named, I think it's Eric, and he's
the most recent one.
Yeah, that's 11.
Yes,
I did play that in Japanese, but I forgot the names.
Different from everyone else, and it sounds like it's almost like he's the American character from the East Coast with all the British accents, and it's like I'm not sure why he stands out that way.
I'm not too sure if it was an intent or not, or whether it was the voice actor, or because voice actors can also bring their own sort of take on a character, and based on the language, the script. I don't know. I honestly don't know if Eric's voice is different in Japanese. I'm not even too sure what his name is in Japanese.
Yeah. No, it was something really. At first, my spouse was watching me play, and she was just like, "Wait, why is that guy so different?"
How do you feel about moving on? So, how do you feel about otaku culture and the differences between, I guess, just nerd culture in general in the UK versus Japan? I know this is kind of a broad question, but I just wanted to know your thoughts.
I don't really have much of an opinion on it because they're so different, and I can't really comment on the UK specifically because I haven't lived in the UK for like 6 years. And sort of I feel like Western, I guess what I should say is more like the Anglo-Western otaku culture is very different from Japanese otaku culture. But even then, like 10 years ago when I was doing my I did my undergraduate in social anthropology, and I did a dissertation on cosplay communities and the differences between the UK and Japan. And at that time, it was very much, even 10 years ago, like people didn't talk about otaku stuff, like in Japan. It was very hush hush.
Oh, yeah.
It definitely originated from, there was a massive, like absolutely horrific incident in 1989 where somebody murdered young girls, and he was dubbed the otaku murderer. And because of that, the attitude towards otaku culture in Japan during the 90s and the 2000s was very antagonistic. Like, these are all weirdos, they're all perverts, they're dangerous people. And so people who adults who liked anime and games would hide that. But I feel like there's definitely been a very strong shift in the last couple of years, even the last 10 to 15 years, where anime, manga, games is becoming more and more popular and more kind of accepted among the general populace. Like, Kimetsu no Yaiba was massive last year.
Yeah.
Like, absolutely massive. Every child and every adult was getting into it. The music was playing in every single store I went into. I still see like the patterns from the characters everywhere because the imagery is so iconic now. And it's so much more accepted. And I see a lot of TV shows, like the One Piece movie just came out in the cinemas, and yesterday like every single channel was talking about One Piece practically. Like, it's so much more accepted now. And I feel like it's also the case in the West, where like anime and manga and otaku culture is a lot more mainstream almost, which is a really good thing because it means a lot more people are getting into it and experiencing it.
Yeah.
So I can't really say if there's much of a difference, more just that I think the internet also helps.
That's got to be it. That's got to be, I mean, obviously a huge factor. I mean, yeah, I remember when I was a kid, you had to kind of hide it for the most part. I mean, video games were maybe the coolest out of the bunch, but you definitely couldn't talk about comic books or anything like that. And I think the success of the Marvel movies also is probably a factor worldwide also. And it felt like there was a good 5 years or so where you would just see stories about cosplay in Japan on the internet, and then the levee broke. Like, everybody in the world does cosplay now. It just feels like it's another area where Japan is kind of ahead of the curve.
But it's an interesting thing, because I'm pretty sure I remember that cosplay really got its start through American sci-fi conventions with Star Trek. So it's like, we put it out there.
It's a full circle.
We leave it alone. We ignore it. We try
true.
to pretend it doesn't exist, and then it comes on back, filtered through another place.
But I think it was really reinvigorated in Japan, and then the word cosplay spreads from there. I mean, you did a thesis on this, right? So you probably know a lot more about this. But also in Japan, they have generally cosplay was made for just people in your friend circle, right? To go to the parks and stuff. But here, it's made for either your your friend circle, I guess, or your Instagram, but also very importantly, your to go to conventions. But it seems like that's a difference though. Like, you can't, not that you can't. There's not. The convention culture, I think, is probably a little different in Japan compared to the UK and America.
Super different. That's one thing that hasn't changed for sure, is that cosplay in Japan is, you do it with your small circle of online friends, but people have cosplay names. Nobody ever shares their real names. Like, if anybody's seen the anime or read the manga for Dress Up Darling, which is amazing, by the way, like, they have their cosplay names and they don't share their real names. And if you share your real name, it's like a big no-no. And I think that's definitely because there's been issues with, stalking and things like that. So people keep their cosplay lives very, very private. Whereas, like you said, in the West, it's go to conventions, talk with strangers, really share in that atmosphere.
People work out just to look good in their cosplay here. Also, that's another very quick tangent here, but when I lived in Japan from 06 to 09, no one even knew what a gym was, it felt like. But from what I can tell online anyway, gym culture in Japan has fucking exploded. You know, that's been a big difference since I lived there.
Have you seen that, Jen? I mean, I was gone before that, so I don't know.
Actually,
it seems like it.
I mean, I think it's because I have a couple of coworkers who are big. I want like big buffs. Like they go to the gym regularly, and they're constantly talking about their gains and their muscles. And I'm like, okay, cool. I have no idea what you're talking about.
The Japanese dudes talking about gains.
No, they're mostly Westerners, but also I've seen a couple of Japanese guys in the gaming company who have like really big muscles, and it's like you must go to the gym. Like it's probably Instagram.
What else could it be, right? I guess Instagram and everything is.
So. I think it's just I don't know, feeling good and talking to your friends about your games and how it's
because Konami
it's a cultural of
games.
its own. Yeah.
Okay.
Started making
all right.
Clubs. Yeah, when I was there, I really struggled to find a place to go exercise, and I ended up paying like $100 a month for something minimal just to have a place. It was
and it was
very
just
rare.
old people, right? It was just old people in the gym at the time.
It was an interesting mix, but it was mostly older folks. Yeah.
I can't comment. I've never been to the gym.
Okay.
I have my Ring Fit, and that's it.
I stopped going though because I got Elder Scrolls 4 Oblivion, and
so well, there you go.
I got a cool game, and I got fat. You know, that was
you didn't get fat. Mike looks the same, exactly the same as he did 10, 15 years ago. It's uncanny.
There's some differences, you know. There's some thinning. There's some graying. You know. I'm getting older.
You look the same, man. You look the same. It's unbelievable. So do you feel that Japanese audiences, going back to RPGs and gaming in general, do you think they want different kinds of stories in games than Western audiences do? Yeah. The type of stories?
Yeah, I don't think people specifically want different stories, but I think that you grow up with different styles of stories. Sort of in the West, we have, the hero's journey and the 3-act structure. And those are styles of stories that we're very familiar with. Whereas in Japan, they're probably more familiar with their own style of storytelling, such as the Kisho Tenketsu, which is the 4-act structure of a very, very slow ramp and then a twist and then a sudden conclusion. And so I think just expectations of storytelling is different, but not necessarily that people want something different. Because as we said, is that Westerners love Japanese stories and Japanese people love Western stories.
There's
definitely a desire for all kinds of different styles, and we're seeing a lot more different culture, like ways of telling stories in the West now, such as with Disney's new movie
Encanto. Is that
Encanto? Yeah. That style of story is I can't remember exactly what it's called. It's something mysticalism,
magical
it's
realism.
Maybe
Magical
it's like
realism is a mostly South American movement of it's called like los cuentos fantásticos. There's fantastical magical realism is basically what translates to, like Isabel Allende and all that. So
that's cool.
That's
cool,
stuff. That's the stuff that I loved when I was in college. But yeah, it never really seemed to take off much. I remember. Did you guys ever see or read Like Water for Chocolate?
No.
That was one of the more popular ones that made its way as sort of a crossover hit, but as much as that kind of thing could be as a crossover hit back in that time frame.
That's so cool. I'm gonna have to add that to my reading list.
The woman would cook, and the emotions that she was feeling would be put into the food, and the people who ate the food would feel that. So if she was crying,
that's cool.
They would sit there and eat the food and start crying. And yeah, I always loved that kind of thing.
That is cool. I like that.
So yeah, that's what I felt too when I started watching Encanto. I was like, oh, this is that great magical realism, the House of the Spirits kind of thing. But
I've heard that, like, we have the 3-act structure in the West. I've heard that there's a little bit less of a preference. I know you just said 4-act structure, but it seems like sometimes they don't. In Japanese storytelling, there's less of an emphasis on even finishing the story, or it kind of drops off. There's no denouement. There's no third act sometimes. There's no conclusion, and that's kind of on purpose sometimes, right? I find these differences, these cultural differences in storytelling, pretty interesting. It and also it kind of sometimes feels to me that I don't know if it's stream of consciousness style writing or what, but there's just sometimes something a little bit looser about Japanese writing. I think a little bit, but also looser, but also more from the heart at times as well. Maybe the heart causes it to be looser. Sometimes, especially if you look at like some of the bigger budget, like if you look at like the latest Star Wars movies, not to upset any Star Wars fans out there, but it's kind of something's too rigid about it or something. You know, it's hard to put my finger on it.
Like it's gotten to the point where in the West, stories are produced in order to create a thing. Like not, oh, do you have a really cool idea? We'll hire you, but you're a famous person. I'm going to hire you to write this because you're famous. And I don't care if you have a good idea or not, just do it. Like,
Hollywood system.
Yeah, the Hollywood system. And I think that's a whole other issue.
But it's all related, but yeah.
This leads me to a curiosity though regarding the story structure and all, because it's one thing to say we work on translation or localization. We want to have equivalence of these phrases, these moments. But have you ever had occasion to say where, oh, this story progression might not be satisfying for an audience in Spain or an audience that is an English-speaking audience with a different expectation? Have you ever had occasion where the story structure itself was something that had to be adapted?
I haven't personally, but I have read, I think it's definitely a thing in novels. I've read a couple of novels where content was after this happens often, is that you have a lot of repetition in Japanese storytelling. Like this character who does this and this thing and this thing is then mentioned again in the next chapter. This character who does this thing and this thing, and it's like, yeah, you already told me last chapter, I don't need to be told this again. And so that kind of stuff would get removed because it doesn't create a very satisfying feeling as an English reader. It can bog it down, and it's like, yeah, I know, don't patronize me. But I have seen other instances where sort of the end of a chapter will have an extra sentence in the English because it creates a stronger conclusion rather than just trailing off. And of course it depends on the style of story. The things I've seen it happening in are mostly fiction, and the one I'm thinking of is science fiction, where they added in extra sentences to kind of give it that punch and give it that oomph. And honestly, it's one of my favorite translated novels of all time because it felt very satisfying to read while also being very entertaining because it still told the original story that the Japanese author came up with.
Are you at liberty to discuss that? I don't know if it's something you worked on.
Yeah, no, it wasn't something I worked on. It was All You Need Is Kill.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Translated by Joseph Reeder, edited by Alexander O. Smith, who have both worked together underneath Richard Mark Honeywood for Square Enix.
Nice.
I went off to work on their own things. They did the original translation of I was talking about the other day, the tactical RPG Vagrant Stories.
Okay. Yeah.
So they're famous for that kind of style of writing, but Joseph Reeder translated All You Need Is Kill, which was obviously so good that it was then turned into a movie.
So All You Need Is Kill went through multiple formats, didn't it? Wasn't it? It became a comic after the novel.
Yes.
And then the movie we saw with Tom Cruise, was it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that movie. Did you guys see it?
Yes.
Yeah, the movie's good.
Yeah. That was surprisingly good. Yeah. I wish they changed the name of it too. It was Edge of Tomorrow. Then it was Live, Die, Repeat when they released on DVD Blu-ray.
Yeah, why did they change the name halfway through?
Hardly ever happens because Edge of Tomorrow is so bland, but Live, Die, Repeat's also bland. In my opinion, they should have just kept it, even when the English isn't super great. All You Need Is Kill. At least that's a cool title. It's a memorable title. You can just imagine the poster with just that title. It would have been so much better that way, and also it would get people intrigued about where did this come from? And it has that inherent kind of Japaneseness to it that I think that somehow draws people in.
So
Anyway,
Alexander
that's me.
O. Smith worked on that, and that reminds me of something I heard about. I think it was Final Fantasy X, right? That he's the one who made the decision about translating "thank you." I think it was to "I love you."
Yeah, to "I love you."
Yeah.
Yeah.
So-
Apparently that was Richard and Alex, because Richard was their manager at the time. Like going in and being like, no, we need to change this, because like you said, it gives Western audiences
Right.
that cathartic release.
Mm-hmm.
If she just said thank you at the end of this emotional story, everybody would be like, what the hell? Come on, girl. Like, what are you saying?
Yeah.
that's such a like, oh, thank you for doing this incredibly dramatic thing.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
Yeah,
I love you was so stronger.
It's
Mm-hmm.
it's definitely
made me cry.
an interesting example of how equivalence works.
You have to get kind of creative, even when in the Japanese it'll say "oh" or "ah" or something
Yes.
too, right? Yeah, that's.
Yeah.
Looking back, I think I've failed some translation tests because of that, because I would just put "ohh" or something for "o." Yeah. So we're getting near the end, and we just have a couple more. Just wanted to know what your thoughts on why do you think Japan has been so successful in selling their pop culture worldwide? I've heard something about America, pop culture-wise, America's been number one selling pop culture, but Japan is number two.
I think it's because the Japanese government have been making a conscious effort to push, it's called Japanese soft power.
Mm-hmm.
And they've been trying to push Japanese media into the West. And actually, even like I always say the West, but it's also they've been pushing it into Southeast Asia and Africa and South America. Like Japanese culture and Japanese media is super popular all over the world because the Japanese government have been really making a conscious push over the last 20 years to kind of spread the image of Japan through media. And because of that, it's created this very positive image of Japan. And even people who aren't interested in anime and manga think of Japan as like this magical country of honor and kimono and geisha. And sort of people, if you say Japan to Westerners, they have a very za Japan image in their heads. And I think that's definitely because like the government have been backing these efforts to try and get media out and to get this very positive image of Japan into the world.
No, that's great because I mean I remember seeing that years ago with France, who also has a very strong relationship with Japan and the arts going back and forth. I think it's like the biggest manga market outside of Japan.
Yeah, I've heard that. Yeah,
but they have government funded support for the arts, and that's how I think even Ubisoft really got its start, was getting some help from the government.
That's cool.
And I always thought, why can't America really do more to help its artists?
Maybe because we just grew up with it at this point, but also to me it always kind of felt like Japan was always like design wise just the perfect type of different. Like, or the just
it's kind of a nebulous thing, but I think we all just kind of feel that.
Yeah, I mean, because there's just so many people that have gotten into anime and video games and stuff from Japan, and it's just something that they do. I guess it's just it's a combination of everything, and also probably even going far back as Sakoku, the period of national isolation for 200 years. Sometimes I think in my head, my little conspiracy theory is that 200 years of isolation really, really solidified even further their inherent uniqueness. I don't know. I didn't do. I don't
know that anybody can know.
Yeah, it's hard to pin down really. I think definitely, like thinking back when I got into anime and manga, it was that at that time that was definitely when. And I feel like Japanese stories tend to have almost like a nihilism that you didn't see in Western media. Like you said, it was very different, and it connected with people who couldn't connect with Western media in the same way.
Well, they say that
Sort of
some of the nihilism, like when the heroes would lose or something, that got into the culture from losing World War II or something like that. I've heard theories about this as well.
I honestly think it's probably because the vast majority of creatives have depression.
Simplest answer, yeah.
As somebody who's struggled with like issues themselves, like it's almost like a kinship of like, oh no, I know exactly how you feel. Like you see Evangelion or Elfen Lied and just really grim stories, and you're like, oh yeah, I know how you feel, man.
It's a level of depth you don't see in the West.
Yes.
Yeah.
Evangelion, I could never watch it. I watched the whole first season recently when it came to Netflix, thinking, let me give it another chance, because I didn't like it when I was a teenager. But yeah, I think it was just too much depression for me.
Really is too much.
I was like, it's all right. I don't really... I have experienced depression, and I don't want it in my show right now.
I
but
like
as an
the
angsty
show.
Teenager, you're like, oh yeah, this is the good stuff.
Yeah, that's true. I did love that. I did love it more back then, probably.
Although I do have to say, I'm not a fan of Evangelion either. It's just the first one that pops in my head when I think of like
it's
the
like
extreme
perfect
scale
example.
of.
It
Oh,
is.
man.
It's such a good example of it. It's just like, oh my God, everything is miserable here.
They should probably make more. I guess they probably have at this point. I don't know, but a little bit more happy mecha anime. Because Evangelion's mark is really strong, and even Gundam is one of the ones that has the sad ending or something.
I know there's like 900 Gundam stories.
Yeah, it's like a bunch of those. It's the exact, well, it's not the exact opposite, but there's definitely a lot more than America for sure, because America, everything's like people win every time. It's hardly ever a sad ending in American
I think
stuff.
that this somewhat has to do with like our own culture of stories, our own history with them, right? Of like what is the value of the story? Where is the moral of it? What are we learning from it, right? And it has to be in line with some sort of Judeo-Christian belief. And it's like, well, here the good guys are going to win. You need to do what's right. Whereas Japan, is a different set of beliefs and can be a little free from that. Maybe it's a burden for our storytelling in the West.
I think also it's the inherent, relative youth, America's a very young country, relatively speaking, and it seems like because, again, just my bullshit theories, but because the whole country is young in a sense, there's still some sort of positivity or naivete, and when you get cultures like UK, and it seems like every culture other than America, just about, there's a little bit more pessimism.
Well, I don't
than America.
I don't know. I mean, I feel like the UK has such an incredible history of stories of like the King Arthur mythos, right? And even Tolkien, like no matter how bleak things are, it doesn't matter. There's just like this pure joy,
true.
like the Hobbits.
That's true.
But I should let Jen
I
speak
feel
on
like
that
we're also
sort of
very
thing.
Yeah.
satirical and have a fine with. I think British humor can be really dark sometimes as well, because just different cultures, different ways of telling stories.
If people talk about the difference in comic characters, as far as like somebody like Superman would never have come out of this is what other comic creators have talked about. Superman probably would only have come out of America, but a lot of UK heroes are like Judge Dredd or something like that. What's pretty dark, a little bit more realistic, really anti-hero kind of stuff. And that's why there's that one guy, Garth Ennis, I think. He's a British guy, and he wrote a famous run for Punisher, because Punisher was an American hero, but that was so in line with UK, in his mind anyway, UK sensibility.
Yeah, I guess because we've like grown up with sort of the government, and having like, or the government always watching you, and the fear of, like in V for Vendetta, the fear of complete government control, fascism, and I know. I that's what I love about media and entertainment is that it's always sort of a reaction to culture and things that are happening around you, while also being almost a reflection of it. So you always have this give and take between reality and media. And media influences reality, and reality influences media, and it goes in this massive circle, which is even more complicated now that we have the internet and we have access to all this entertainment from different cultures.
Yeah.
That's true. All right. Well, I guess that's going to do it. Mike, got anything?
Yeah.
Any last questions?
Let's wrap it up with this. Like, just if you could go through what you consider to be, you've touched on this already a little bit, of what you consider to be sort of the ideal approach towards translation and localization, what the process looks like.
Honestly, my ideal approach would be everybody is working in close collaboration and everybody is working together. Like, you are free to critique and to compliment each other and to really help make a project shine. And I think that is so important, because when you start turning it into I keep forgetting the word. Just a you do this, then you do this, then you
assembly
do this
line
process.
Is what you said.
Assembly
before.
line, yes. Yeah, when you turn it into an assembly line, it removes the heart of the project. Because obviously there's heart in the original work, but there needs to be heart in the translation as well. And I think collaboration is so important to that.
All right.
That's cool.
That's a good way for us to end. So thank you so much, Jenn, for coming on. And again, to those of you who are interested in pursuing careers in translation, Jenn has made a lot of great resources available on her site, jenntranslation.com. And she's got a few podcasts, so check it all out. And thank you so much for coming on with us, Jenn. It's been a real pleasure.
No, thank you.
Thank you. I actually bought a book from your recommended books as well. It hasn't come in yet, but yeah, a lot of great resources on there. It's J-EN translations
with an S.
.com.
Okay.
So check it out. And that's it. Thanks you, everybody. And thank you, Jenn. It's been awesome.
Thanks.
All right. Well, thanks for listening. If you liked this episode, please subscribe to us on YouTube, Spotify, or Apple Music.
And if you really liked us, please join our Patreon, where you can become a member at our Patreon. I got to rewrite this sentence.
Maybe we should leave this one.
We're going to leave this one in. Anyway, it's patreon.com/gaminggaiden. We have 2 tiers right now for season 1. Maybe there'll be more tiers for future seasons. We'll figure that out when we get there. But right now, our tier 1 is our $1 tier, and that gets you a shout out on our social media, namely Instagram. We'll have a board of names, whatever name you want us to pick on there, and we can put you on that. And that's basically kind of like a tip jar / just a shout out. You become like a producer of the show in a sense. So maybe we can call you a producer, Gaming Gaiden producer.
Just like I produced Shenmue 3 on Kickstarter.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Like a Kickstarter kind of idea. So yeah, become a producer, become a Gaming Gaiden producer at the $1 tier, and then become, maybe we can call it associate producer tier 1, and then you're a producer at tier 2, where it's a $5 tier, and that will get you bonus episodes. We're going to have, so the bonus content, it'll be less about interviews, just me and Mike, and we will have a topic at hand. Like Mike, I haven't even told Mike this, but I was thinking like our time with RPGs, what we don't like about them, what we like. I have like a whole rant I could do about RPGs. I have my whole gaming history involving gaming memories and stuff like that. And that's just one thing. Another idea was we haven't recorded it yet as of this episode, but top ninja games or something like that. So that is at the $5 tier.
You'll get to hear
cancel
us.
anytime.
I just want to clarify, there will be no interviews on that beyond the two of us. It's the two of us talking about selected topics. So we won't be bringing guests on for those.
Yeah, that's just us. So please join us there, and we will be using our Patreon funds. Actually to help pay for the hosting for for the for this extra podcast I'm doing, because I have the other one, Superhero Stuff You Should Know. So any money made from that will go a little bit towards that, but also only a percentage of that, Mike. Don't worry, because the rest of it will go.
It's necessary.
Another percentage will go to our retro gaming habit. I'd like to get a Neo Geo CD with these funds, if at all possible. And Mike,
I would love to get myself a Mister. They just keep getting better, those things.
yeah, if you know anything about a Mister, look it up. Look up Mister emulation. You'll find it. It's like they upgrade to the Retro Pi, right? I mean, it's in spirit.
It is, rather than software emulation, it is hardware emulation.
Oh,
Basically,
right.
the computer pretends to be a Super Nintendo if you're going to play a Super Nintendo game. So it's a much more accurate way to play these older games. Beyond original hardware, of course, which is, hard to get hold of, or you might want to protect your cartridges. I have a bunch of stuff. I have like a whole bunch of stuff in a storage unit, and I'd rather just get a Mister to play it.
Yeah, I'm in the line to get a Steam Deck just to have all my emulation on there. But that's outside. That's not the podcast. That's Neo Geo CD Z. And then maybe for Season 2, the actual cartridge. I don't know. We'll go crazy. The AES, MVS system, or all that. I wear these shirts almost every recording. But anyway, I guess that's it. Thank you for listening. This is another episode in Season 1 of Gaming Gaiden. We'll see you later.